How you doing, sir?
Yeah, doing well.
Good, good.
And Dad responded with, I thought they taught you this, and driver said, no.
That'd be Martin, that's right.
They taught us a lot of things, but they didn't make us change tires. So he was mad himself or not? What, we drove without two? He's like, probably figured it out. Oh, yeah, they're dirty.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Yeah, very good. I tried. I got the flat tire and I can't remember what I was supposed to do. I really don't have flat. It was at midnight. I got off work and this guy pulled up behind me. He goes, what are you doing? I was like, tire? He said, get out of the way. What's you?
That's nice. Yeah. Well, that's what my boss.
I mean, you get those really once.
I mean, I just got down the car and got some.
Okay, kind of like Cal. Well, Cal had retired from there,
I
probably
didn't
could
have
tell
to
us
even touch it before he pulled over, and I was like,
At least until
Yeah,
70,
first stop
because
is
the longer you wait, the better.
right, because we're not in a very well lit parking lot. It was a shut down place.
Well, if he
The
likes
lights on.
what he's doing.
Likes what he's doing, he's good at it.
I'm doing wrong.
When I ran out of gas and
Oh, give us the
Good
trouble.
thing you yourself.
Yeah, I bet.
he went down and he said, oh, you got enough to make it back. He has it. I made it.
Except for the
down
truck.
right there.
Well, he's hooked used to it now. I mean,
Okay, he takes things to do.
Well, he's got miles, so he gets them graves and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, wonderful.
yes, I am.
And I don't.
It's raining now.
Okay. And he said,
You doing, Isaac?
My name is Karen. Karen is Jared's
okay,
Yes. Breaks your heart.
It's only like a plus mile, how many miles?
Hey, this is my old seat.
Someone always used to get it.
You messed it up, John.
I mean,
you're always causing trouble.
Really?
do my best.
You're on that.
John came in and did something. It's his fault.
There it is.
Now don't mess it up again.
I'll try.
Okay, we're in Genesis, the 28th chapter. We had stopped at verse 12 last time. So let's see. Yeah, that's probably where we'll begin. Jacob is at Bethel, and he's dreaming a dream here that we'll talk about here in verse 12. So before that, if you didn't get a chance to meet my very dear friends Bob and Ramona, Bob and I served as elders together up in Iowa, and so they're down here for a few days. Treat them right or I'll have to whoop you. And I don't want to do that.
Yes, sir.
I'll sick John on you.
Yeah.
Debbie, glad you're back.
I have a friend.
Yes.
Raylyn, who's visiting.
What's the friend?
Raylyn?
Raylyn? All right, Raylyn. Good to have you.
Thank you.
I was just thinking, I'm going to run you for about 20 feet.
I don't want you to outrun me. I want you to whip whoever gets out of line. All right, Genesis 28th chapter. I don't know if any, just to update, Catalina Terry had gallbladder surgery Monday, if you haven't heard. She is staying with her mother, so everything's okay there. But she's in a lot of pain. And Terry Spray, she was in surgery for 3 hours on Monday, but it went better than they expected. So, but she's going to have a long recovery because that was a very extensive surgery, front going in and then back, and they fused several vertebrae. So she's going to have a long period of recovery. So those are individuals that we want to keep in our prayers. So, Let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the many blessings You've given us. And we thank Thee, Father, for Your love and patience with each one of us, for Your willingness to send Your Son to die upon the cross that we might have everlasting life. If we'll be faithful to Thee, we're thankful for Your Word and for the opportunity to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We ask that You would continue to be with us as we look into the book of Genesis, that we might have a full understanding of those things You want us to know. And we ask also, Father, that You'd be with our members who have physical ailments, that they might be restored to their health as soon as possible, and that You might use us as instruments to reach out and help in any way that we can. We ask also, Father, that You'd be with the victims of the hurricanes, that they might receive the help that they need in a timely fashion so that they can get back to a normal life. And use us in any way that we can, that we might be able to help those in need, that we might be able to spread the gospel in accordance with Thy will. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, Genesis, the 28th chapter. We'll begin at verse 12. And in your handout, it's on page 68, verses 12 and 13. So let's just read 12 and 13. And Pat, could we begin with you tonight?
You said 12 and 13?
Yes, please.
Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached the heaven, and there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie I will give you and your descendants.
Okay, so Jacob is here at Bethel, and he laid his head down and everything, and he's having this dream, and he sees these things. And as you see the heading I put up there, Jacob receives his first visible manifestation. This was a manifestation to humankind of God, or a God, in a form that, though visible, is not necessarily material. Now we know it is of God, but at this point Jacob doesn't fully understand. The ladder was a visible symbol of the real and uninterrupted fellowship between God and His people. The angels upon it carry up the needs of men to God and bring down the assistance and protection of God to man. The point then is to emphasize the continual communion of God with man. And Jesus will later say that He is the ladder, the ultimate mediator between heaven and earth. Turn, if you will, to John, the 1st chapter, and look at verse 51. Karen, you had that?
No, I was looking for
John 1 and verse 51.
Okay, I was looking at the wrong place.
That's okay.
John 1. And he saith unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye shall see the heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man.
Okay, and this is basically what Jacob is seeing here. And so, angels accompanied Jacob's departure from and return to Canaan. Go to Genesis, the 32nd chapter, and verse 1. Cal, you had that?
Sure. Now, as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him.
Okay? And so, the angels then suggest that the Lord, who makes His presence known at Bethel, will also be present to Jacob through the angelic messengers. So this vision then of the angels is an assurance of God's protection of Jacob even though he is leaving home. Any questions or comments on verse 12?
Well, I think it's translated ladder. I think it's probably more of a staircase
Yes.
going up and down. It must have been very crammed.
Yeah.
So,
Several translations translated stairs.
Yes. Yes. Very true. All right. Good point. Appreciate you bringing that up. All right. We read verse 13, but let's go ahead and read verses 14 and 15 as well. Billy, you want to read that for me, please?
28, 14.
And 15, yes.
15.
Of 28.
Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you.
Okay. Now in your handout, actually the latter part of verse 28 and, of chapter 68, and page 69, there's a lot of comments that are made there, some from Guy M. Woods, some from Henry Morris, but down in capital letter H, the blessing of Abraham had been passed down to Isaac and now is given to Jacob. And that's what I have up on the screen there. That's where you would be in your handout, okay? What we see here is the blessing of Abraham had been passed down, as we read here in these verses 13 through 15. So for the first time, Jacob receives the promises that had been given to his father. In addition to the land and the nation, which Isaac had blessed him with, God bestows on him the blessing of the promised seed. Okay? Now, if you look at this slide, there we go. So we have Abraham over here, and we have Isaac, and we have Jacob. And we'll look at some of these scriptures, but go back to Genesis chapter 21, if you will, and look at verse 22. This is the promise that God made to Abraham. And Donna, read that for me, please.
Now it came about at the time that Abimelech and the commander of his army spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do.
Okay, so God will be with Abraham. This was also said to Isaac, though, if you look at Genesis 26, verse 3. Donna, go ahead and turn over there, if you will. And after that, I'll have you read 28, verse 15, because we'll just go straight across so you see the whole thing, okay? So Isaac, Genesis 26 and verse 3.
Sojourn in this land, that I will be with you and to bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham.
Okay, so God told Isaac then, I will be with you. Now look at Jacob chapter 28 and verse 15. Now read that one for me, Donna.
Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
All right, so here again, I will be with you. Now, the second part we see is God says, I will bless thee. Look at Genesis 12, verse 2. Florence, I'll have you read that, and then I'll have you go to Genesis 26, verse 3.
I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing.
All right, that's to Abraham. I will bless you. Isaac.
Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father.
Okay, so here with Isaac now. Here again, I will bless you. Now let's... You had a comment, John?
No, I had to get them.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead and scratch it. You have my permission.
I already did.
Okay. All right, next section. I will give thee all these countries. Let's look at Genesis 12:1. Ramona, you want to read that?
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house, am I in the right place? To the land that I will show you.
All right. I will get the land I will show you. Now look at Genesis 15, verse 7, Ramona.
And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of Chaldees to give you this land to possess.
All right, and then verse 18 in that same chapter.
Verse 18 of the same chapter. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I will give this land from the river of Egypt to the river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites.
Okay, now this was made to Abraham. I will give thee all these countries. Now let's go to Isaac. Look at Genesis 26 and verse 3 again. Ramona, read that for me.
Genesis 26, verse 3.
Yes.
Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath which I swore to Abraham your father.
Okay, again, I will give all these lands or countries to Isaac. Now the same promise is made to Jacob, Genesis 28, verse 13. Ramona.
13. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants.
Okay, so now we have the land promise. Now we go to, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven. We go back to Genesis 15 and verse 5. Bob, if you'll read that for me, please.
And he took him outside and said, Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be.
So I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven. Now let's see what he said to Isaac, Genesis 26, verse 4.
I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed.
All right, and then let's see what he said to Jacob, Genesis 28, verse 14.
Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
Okay, now we go, in thy seed shall all the nations be blessed. Genesis 12, verse 3. Redine, you want to read some?
Sure.
Okay, read Genesis 12, verse 3 for me.
Oh, Genesis 12?
Yes,
Yeah.
Genesis 12, verse 3. This right here.
Okay.
What we're doing is we're looking at Abraham here, and what God said to Abraham, in thy seed shall all nations be blessed.
I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Okay, now we go to Genesis 26, verse 4, and we see what God said to Isaac.
18,
Do what?
Do you want to do 18?
Yeah, I should do 18. Thank you. I was thinking it's over here, but you're right. I have it there. So thank you, John. Go back and read Genesis 18, verse 18 for me, Redine.
Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him.
Okay, all the nations shall be blessed. Now look at Genesis 22, verse 18, Redine. This is still Abraham.
In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice.
All right, now then we go to Isaac, Genesis 26, verse 4. You want to read that one?
Yeah. 26 and 4. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed.
All right, and then finally, Genesis 28, verse 14, we're going to look at Jacob.
So 28 and 14. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall
Okay.
be blessed.
So the point of doing all this is so you know the consistency of God. What God said to Abraham, He said to Isaac. What He said to Isaac, He said to Jacob. There's no change. The promise that was made initially is the same promise that's being carried through here. Now I want you to go to verse 4 of chapter 28, where it says, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. What we see is if the blessing of Abraham was intended to convey the entirety of the blessing, God is here clarifying and establishing precisely what that blessing entails. The promises given span across time and space. a stream of insurances flowing from the central, I am the Lord, to spread from the past. Look at 13 again, just the first part of 13. It says, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord. Okay? To the distant future, from the spot where Jacob lay, the latter part of 13, when he says, God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac, the land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Remember, now he's lying down at this point. So, to emphasize just how broad this promise is, you look again at verse 14 and you see that it encompasses four corners of the earth, because it says, also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south. You see the four corners there? So, from this person, or from his person to all mankind, is what the promise is here. The latter part of 14 says, and in you and in your seed all families of the earth shall be blessed. So this shows the omnipresence that he can go with Jacob to protect him even while remaining with the family in Palestine. God is everywhere. Although Jacob will sojourn in Mesopotamia for several years, he will know throughout that it is not to be his permanent home. He is to return to the land to which God had taken his grandfather. Any comments through verse 15?
This is a kind of a forecasting of things to come. I mean, like, because it says the seed, your seed of the families of the earth will be blessed. In your seed of the all the families of the earth will be blessed. All the families.
Right.
So it's kind of a prediction, what's going to happen. So in the New Testament it talks about the mystery. Well, this kind of is kind of a revelation, if you will. I mean, it kind of gives a hint of that to come.
Right. Absolutely. Any other comments? All right, look then at verses 16 through 19. Debbie, you want to read that for me, please?
Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
Through 19.
Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city had been Luz previously.
Okay. So as I have up there, the presence of God changes things, all right? So having awakened now, Jacob realizes the point of the vision and finally understands God's presence throughout the earth. Jacob's reaction, though, is different than Abraham's and Isaac's to the divine revelation. Let's go back and look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 there, and look at that reaction. John, you want to read that for me, please?
Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show you.
Okay. So God has given specific instructions to Abraham, but now let's look at chapter 15 and verse 1. John, go ahead and turn over there to that for me, please. (15 and 1).
After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward.
Okay, now here's a caution. Do not fear or fear not. Now look at 17 verse 1, John.
And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared unto Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God walk before me, and be thou perfect.
Okay, now look at 22 and verse 1.
And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am.
All right, the last one, John 26, verse 1.
And there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gaza.
All right. So, a suggestion is that perhaps Abraham and Isaac, when you look at them compared to Jacob, that his fear is prompted by his realization that he was, or he has wronged his father and brother. How did Jacob wrong his father and brother?
Deceived them.
Huh?
He deceived them.
He deceived them, didn't he? He deceived both of them when you get down to it. So Adam also feared God's presence after he had sinned, did he not? What did he do? He hid. Yes, John.
He deceived his brother.
How did Jacob deceive his brother? Well, in essence, he was deceiving his father, but he deceived his brother in the sense that he took what was his brother's. That's the reason I'm saying that.
I still think he sold it to him.
Well, you're thinking of that first part of it, but what about that was his birthright? But what about the blessing?
The birthright is the blessing goes to the birthright. The firstborn is what's got the blessing.
That's the fiscal blessing.
The firstborn's got the birthright.
That's,
so when you get the birthright, you got the blessing.
No, that's not necessarily true. When Isaac blessed Jacob, he gave him a blessing that he could not give Esau. But it had nothing to do with the physical aspects of a person's belongings.
Well, it's obvious that.
Well, he thought he was giving.
Well, Isaac didn't think so.
No, Isaac didn't think so. You're right.
Isaac thought, well, the blessing. I think Isaac knows that birthright has been sold by Esau. Okay. That's the inheritance where he gets the double portion. But he knows that he's planning on giving the blessing, though, to Esau. That's
right.
His plan.
But what did Esau say? Esau said, first he stole my birthright, and then what?
I got the blessing.
Then he got my blessing too.
Yeah. So he sees it.
So Esau knew the difference. Okay? But I understand what you're saying, John.
Normally he's right. The firstborn would get both.
Yes. That is correct. Any other thoughts? All right, so this fear is, in this case, also an appropriate contrast to his fleeing for his life. Remember now, his mother sent him back to Haran because she feared that she was going to lose both sons. And she did not want to lose Jacob. Jacob was her favorite son. So Jacob set the stone up so that it would, in Bethel here, so that it would stand as a marker of the place. While this was not intended to convey setting it up for idolatrous purposes, this type of pillar will later be forbidden by the law of Moses that Jacob did here. All right, and to show that, let's go to Exodus 23rd chapter and look at verse 24. Maxine, you had that?
Thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works, but thou shalt utterly overthrow them, and quite break down their images.
Okay, and Stephanie, you had Exodus 34, verse 13?
But you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images.
Okay. And Ron, you want to read Deuteronomy 16, verses 21 and 22 for me?
You shall not plant for yourself any tree as a wooden image near the altar which you build for yourself to the Lord your God. You shall not set up a sacred pillar which the Lord your God hates.
All right, and Isaac, 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 22 and 23.
Now Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy, and their sins were, which they committed, more than all their fathers had done. For they also built for them 12 high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree.
Okay. So, this type of pillar will later be forbidden by the law of Moses, okay? But now here's the question. What was the purpose of the anointing by oil? You remember? Let me turn back over to chapter 28 here. And you look at verse 18. It says, Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. What was the purpose of pouring oil on top of it?
It's an anointing. It was to be set aside as, Jacob was to be set aside as someone God in favor of.
Okay. All right.
What you're saying is a sacred place.
Sacred place.
I remember this sacred place. I'm marking this separate place with this rock. I'm going to anoint the rock with oil to set this apart.
Okay.
Now, in other places we see they set, sometimes they call these an Ebenezer. Okay. It's a memory stone. It's a marker stone, marks a significant event in their history or like that. And this was really quite common all through the region.
Okay.
Of course, we know the obelisks that the Egyptians put up, which were highly carved and everything else. But the Syrians did it, the Hittites did it, and all the different cultures did that to memorialize certain events, things that have happened.
Okay. John?
Got the first good rain, that oil gone.
Well, it depends on what kind of oil. But, what Cal's saying, what Pat said, this is true. It was a sign of consecrating and dedicating this place. And this is what Jacob is doing at this point. Now, another question is, Bethel, which was formerly called Luz. What does the name Bethel mean? House of God. A good way to look at that. Look at verse 17. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of God, or gate of heaven, I'm sorry. And then in verse 19, and he called the name of that place Bethel. Bethel means house of God. Okay? Any other comments on these verses through 19? Yes, John.
Was it a city?
Was Bethel a city? Bethel.
No, it was by a city. It says it's by a city.
Well, Bethel was a city eventually, yeah.
It was Luz, wasn't it?
Luz.
Luz was a city, yeah. And so Luz was, it was formerly called Luz, now it's called Bethel. Population, I don't know. Probably wasn't heavy population at this time, but I don't know. So, but good question. Any other comments or questions? All right, look at verses 20 through 22 then. And let's see here. Pat, I guess we're back to you. You want to read that for me, please?
28, 22?
No, 20 through 22. Chapter 28, yes.
28, 22. Sorry, I got lost. And this stone, which I said...
No. Read verse 20 through 22.
Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and keep me in this way, that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I can come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you.
Okay. So, men can make vows unto God, as I have up here. This in your handout, this would be capital letter J, okay, and K. Those two on page 70 of your handout. So the vow reorients Jacob's journey. Where is Jacob headed?
Living in this place.
Where?
He said heading to his uncle's was close.
Laban.
Haran.
Yeah,
Haran.
right, to Haran or Haran.
I think the name of the city.
That's okay. You were right. The journey had originated as flight to avoid assassination. Remember that. And a trip to find a wife suitable to his parents. What was the concern about Esau? What did Esau do?
Foreign wives.
He married foreign wives. And so...
Married women of the land.
Huh?
Married women of the land he was living in.
Right. Married women of the land.
And when he saw it displeased his parents, he went and did some more.
That's right. And so Jacob's mother used this as rationale to get Jacob out of there by going to Isaac and saying, look, we don't need any more headaches by wives that we can't accept. And so we need to get Jacob out of here to find suitable wives. Now Jacob's journey then becomes a pilgrimage with theological content, because he goes to the same place for much the same purpose, but now he travels as a carrier of God's promises with divine assurances of aid. Jacob, yes, John.
If he left everything and went to get a wife and was gone for 20 years, didn't Esau get everything anyhow?
Well, apparently not, because remember last week we talked about all the problems Esau and his descendants had and everything?
Yeah.
So I don't know what...
about all the possessions.
Yeah, I don't know. The scriptures doesn't suggest that, but he could have, I guess.
That Jacob had a whole big, huge company with him.
Yeah.
Just he had to have somebody.
Yeah. But Jacob's words echo the promises that we go back to verse 15. And it says, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. So his promises made in verse 15 with food and clothing added, his prayer is thus based on the divine promise. Jacob plans to establish in this place a sacred spot or sanctuary upon the completion of this vow. Go to Genesis, the 35th chapter, if you will. I do have it up there. 35th chapter, verses 6 and 7. Karen, you want to read that for me, please?
So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan. The same is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God was revealed unto him when he fled from the face of his brother.
Okay. El Bethel. What does that mean?
God of the house of God.
Okay. God of the house of God. All right. So Jacob plans to establish in this place, as I mentioned, a sacred spot or sanctuary upon the completion of this vow. A full tenth is a second reference in Scripture to a pre-Mosaic tithe to God. Going back to Genesis chapter 14 and verse 20. Cal, you have that?
14 verse 20.
Yeah, 14 verse 20, please.
And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all.
Okay. So, back then a tithe was in most cases considered a tenth. Okay. So this marks an important moment in his transformation. He is no longer a grasper, but he is now a giver, is what we see in these latter verses, 20 through 22. Any comments on 20 through 22 or anything in chapter 28? Yes, Pat.
I'm still thinking about something John said. It's making me wonder just how unspiritual Esau was. John was talking about him getting Esau getting his inheritance after he was left there. Well, the only thing he would have had would be a few sheep. Is that meaningful? Jacob went on to do what his mother asked him to, which she seemed to be more spiritual than her husband. I mean, everything she seemed to be thinking was very spiritual off into the future.
Yeah.
And everything that Isaac and Esau, or the father and the son, were thinking were just not that spiritual. I don't know. I'm just sitting here in a daze trying to put this together as to why Rebecca is so much more spiritual than Jacob.
Uh,
Those two are doing things God would want them to, and the other two are just there.
Yeah.
They're in the story.
I know what you're saying.
It just
The
makes
one
a
thing
lot
I would always keep in mind, you know, God's will is going to be done, and He has a plan, okay? But you go back to Genesis chapter 27, and we could look at other parts there, but I want to look at verse 41. It says, "So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him, and Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob." That was his objective from this point on. All he wanted to do, he wanted to get revenge. And so, the scriptures don't tell us, but I cannot see that Esau was concerned at this point of the material possessions that his father Isaac had. He was more concerned with the revenge because he felt that Jacob had betrayed him. And Jacob had cheated him out of something that really belonged to him.
But it didn't have any meaning for him.
Right. And then when you go back and you look at the blessing that Isaac actually gave Jacob, let's see here, find that. In verse 34 it says, "When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said, O his father, bless me also, O my father. But he said, Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. And Esau said, Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing. And he said, Have you not reserved a blessing for me? Then Isaac answered and said to Esau, Indeed, I have made him your master, and all his blessing, his brethren, I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, Behold, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of the heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, and it shall come to pass when you become restless. And this was the blessing that Isaac gave to Esau. Esau was a warrior type individual. And we looked at several scriptures where this was taking place. He and his descendants were conquered. They conquered. He conquered. So on and so forth. But as far as Jacob is concerned, his whole goal was revenge.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that Esau went to heaven? I know you're not supposed to judge, but I'm just, I'm following this man's life, and I don't see any spirituality. I don't care if he is a warrior. I just don't see it. He messes up all the time.
All I can say is when we looked at all the scriptures and everything, there was no indication that Esau ever... Although, I take that back. Cal, go ahead.
Well, when his brother comes back, his brother's afraid of him, but at that time, by now, he is matured, I think, and he is ready to reconcile with his brother.
Right.
But from his line comes Edom.
Right. They were the Edomites.
And Edomites were always
warring people.
And there was always antagonism between the two peoples, the Israelites and the Edomites, and to the point where eventually God puts a curse upon Edom because of the evil they always try to do to Israel.
Right.
And so this story, remember, those people had long memories. We think people have long memories and hold grudges a long time here. But it's still that way in the Middle East. They have these long memories and long grudges that they hold for not just for generations, for centuries. And so I don't know. I can't make that judgment on whether...
I can't make the judgment. I mean, if we were going to use anything to suggest that maybe he did go to heaven was when indeed he reconciled with his brother. Okay? The Edomites, though, were descendants of his, and they were people, warring people and everything. That doesn't mean Esau himself continued to do that, but his descendants did. So you look at that and you might suggest, well, what kind of teaching did they have? What kind of teaching did they give their offspring? And so we don't know. We don't know. And I would never stand up here and say yes or no.
Well,
Okay?
he fits into the story just fine.
Yeah, all right.
I guess that's what he's there for.
All right, so I want to show you this map because this is the last thing I'll show you tonight since that's our last bell. So he leaves here from Bethel, right here. He goes to Shechem, and then he goes on up to Haran. All right, and that takes us to chapter 29 next week, which we'll look at Rachel and Leah and the problems that took place there. All right, I appreciate your comments tonight.
That's a long way to go to find. That's a long way to go to find a wife.
It is.
You couldn't see me because all these tall people were.
Did I miss you or something? Huh? Did I not call on you?
Abraham's possession, Isaac
I'm
got-
sorry, Billy. I did.
Isaac gained so much.
Man.
Philistines asked him.
Billy, I am so sorry.
Very rich. Esau,
I can't believe I skipped right over you, Billy.
Esau got everything.
I'll probably go home and not be able to sleep tonight now.
When he came back, all the possessions stayed with
Oh,
Esau.
okay.
Ask for forgiveness.
I will. I promise.
That might be why he meddled some.
That proves my point. It made me stop thinking. Possessions didn't mean anything to Jacob.
Not to Jacob, but they did to Isaac. I mean, to
He
Esau.
was a spiritual person.
They did to Esau.
You're not supposed to think so highly of your
I don't know that
possessions.
Jacob was all that spiritual.
That's why Esau after 20 years wasn't too mad at him. He was living high on the hog.
When you see these people, you see them.
Well, Esau wasn't at all spiritual.
After 20 years of being rich, Esau was living high on the hog. He wasn't mad at Jacob no more.
That could be true.
Because Jacob left all possessions of Isaac. Isaac got all of Abraham's possessions. With all the stuff that said Abraham. Abraham sent everybody away but Isaac, so Isaac got it all.
Think
Well, Isaac
about
wasn't,
things
he wasn't,
that were spiritual rather
he's
than
kind of like born with a silver spoon in his mouth, what we say now. And so were the
She
twins.
favored her son.
Because Isaac had all his possessions. The Philistines asked you to leave because they was gaining so much possessions and so much servants and stuff that was bigger than them. So he wasn't a pauper. Well, no. But Jacob didn't have all that with him.
All you have to go by people that
Isaac gained all that.
Isaac has no.
That's what I'm saying. Isaac had all that. That might be why he never toward Jacob. Jacob just left him.
You're seeing people. You're seeing people with all the words.
Right. But see, that's what I want to see. And I want to see the ones that God does work with and the ones that God does accept. And he didn't. He wasn't very happy with Esau. He wasn't even happy with his dad. How could he be?
remember those victims, both in Texas and Florida, and through the other states, Oregon and South Carolina were affected by the hurricane. A lot of people have lost their homes, there's been a lot of death, a lot of injuries, and so we just continue to pray that they might receive help that they need so they can get back to their normal life as soon as possible. Other than that, I have no other announcements. We're going to have Michael to lead us in one more song,
you follow that, Dale?